to start?
Well,
This is Lisa.
Sure. I'm your moderator for today for the Paul Freeman Q&A. And this man here has done so many things over the past years. I mean, the list of accolades is beyond. So please welcome Paul Freeman.
I don't know about accolades. I've done a lot of work. I didn't get many accolades for it, but I've been okay. So where should we start? Anyone want to kick off with a question or what?
Yeah. What was the process in getting? For I'm News, can you tell us the experience and the full experience for the makeup and getting into that costume and what that whole process was like?
It was filmed in Sydney, you know, and we went over there and I met I was cast in London, flew to Sydney, met the designer and the director. And the designer, an Australian called Warren Beatty, very clever man, who, incidentally, in order to do the prosthetics, had studied prosthetics in a hospital in Sydney for a couple of years. So he really knew about the mechanics of the body. He designed the face. He also designed those, later on, designed those rock creatures. Remember the sort of cliff that comes alive? He designed that too. The face was made of 5 separate parts of latex. There was one across the forehead, which went under my brows, into my eyes here. Another piece that went over each cheek. Another piece that covered the nose and went up under my lip. Another piece which was the chin piece, which went at the bottom lip. And then the hat thing was put on afterwards, with all the bones in the head. And I had purple contact lenses, silver teeth, and I had to drink. This was my idea, because once I got all this purple stuff on, my mouth looked too pink. So every day before we started, I drank some very strong blackcurrant juice. So that I had a purple tongue as well. It just didn't work. When we first tried it, he got all these pieces together, and it took 7 hours to put it all on. It's stuck, obviously, and it's latex, it's very light. We got it done in 4 hours, so every day I would go through this process, and you know, with filming, you start early in the morning. They're all starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, usually. So I have to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning, just me and Warren in the caravan. I carry on sleeping, but I try and sleep as much as I can while he's doing this. Completely transformed. But then I'm stuck. I can't do anything else for the rest of the day. You can't take it off, because it's an hour and a half to take it off. And we do this for about 2 weeks, and then my skin starts to erupt, because nobody has thought about the problems of putting glue on your face every day for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, that coincided with deciding that they had to reshoot a lot of the stuff we'd already shot, involving the Japanese monkeys and things. I can't remember what the characters were called. Which meant that I had to have a week off anyway for my skin to deflate. And so I had the week off, and then we reshot the early part again. And then they had to build in days off, so that I worked for a day and then rested for a day and so on. So that was the process. And at the end of the day, the hour and a half at the end of the day, I would just, because I wasn't able to, because of the teeth, because of the mask fitting inside the lips, I wasn't even able to eat very much. And I couldn't move very much either, because the costume was very long and heavy. And I had big, they're called Greek shoes, they're chinos, which have a sole about that big. So I was stamping around. If I had to move anywhere, they had to carry me. I sat in a wheelchair and pushed me around on the set. What else to tell you about? Oh, just the process of taking it off. I would be sipping beer. At the end of the day, I could have a drink. I needed a drink too. At the end of the day, I'd be sipping beer from a Guinness from a straw. So they got tubes of Guinness stacked up, and I just sort of collapsed there. I don't smoke, but I started smoking too while I was doing this, while I was taking this thing off. That was the process. Yeah.
I just teach protocol, and is there some case of stories or memories you had about that you possibly share with us that would be interesting?
Well, so many stories about raiders. One thing that happened was there's a whole section we filmed with some. At one point they decided we were in Tunisia for most of the occasion filming, and they needed young German soldiers, and they hadn't thought about hiring people in Germany or pretending getting English actors or anything. They weren't meant to be acting parts. So they rounded up tourists in Tunisia at that time. Blonde tourists, and they just put them in German uniforms. But George Lucas has this theory that he doesn't really need actors, which he told us often. You probably read about this. He actually thinks puppets will do just as well, which he told us. So one day we turn up to do this scene, and we've got a few of these young actors there. And he says, I've written a scene for the Germans now. We don't need you all. So he got us all to sit down. We're up in the desert, ready to work in the heat and stuff. We just sit down and watch these guys who aren't actors at all doing all these scenes. And it was sort of to put us in our place in a way, to say, we don't need you, actors. We are sitting there thinking, oh yes you do. We can see that these guys can't act. Start. I think he did. And I know in Star Wars he put in some extra lines just to unnerve the actors. Yeah. So that they thought, oh, my job's on the line. There was one instance. You'll remember this, but Mark, the young guy Mark, Howell, he gave him a line where he had to talk about the next person in line. And none of this was a new line in the script, we put it in that day. And it was to undermine it, to make him think, oh, if I don't do this right, somebody else is going to come along and play the part. So this is what he was doing with us and these German soldiers. And sure enough, not one of these scenes that he shot all day with the glass just sitting, not one of them appeared in the movie. Welcome. We're a small, intimate group this morning, you see. So we decided to have a party instead. Me too. Yeah.
So how did you get the role of Dr. Belloq?
That was a strange one, because I'd just done a movie called The Dogs of War in Belize. And I went to New Orleans with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. She's in The Dogs of War too. She's not an actress, but she had as well acting. And while we were in New Orleans, I got a call from my agent in London saying I should go to meet Spielberg. He'd seen a drama documentary I'd done the previous year called Death of the Princess, which was quite a big scandal at the time. It was about the true story of a Saudi Arabian princess who was beheaded, and about the investigation into it. It was about the way the truth eventually was revealed, but in fact not revealed. The truth really didn't come out too late. It turned out it was her grandfather, the brother of the then king of Saudi Arabia, who had her executed for trying to leave the country with her boyfriend. She was a 19-year-old girl. Terrible story. Anyway, Spielberg saw this and decided he wanted me for the role and wanted me to go to meet him in LA. So I thought, he'd already cast an Italian actor, quite a well-known actor called Giancarlo Giannini in the part. For some reason, when he saw me, in fact, I was telling someone this yesterday, he said, well, it's because Death of the Princess was filmed in the desert. And he knew it was going to be in the desert, and he thought, this man looks good in sand. I think it might have been a bit more complicated than that. So, and of course, we had no idea, my girlfriend, my now wife, and I, how far New Orleans was from Los Angeles. Being Europeans, so we hired a car. And when I said to the guy, we're taking the car to LA, he said, oh, right, and how are you going to return it? I said, well, I'll leave it at the other end. He said, yeah, but when will you do that? I said, well, the day after tomorrow. He said, you'll still be on the road. I said, why? He said, because it's a long way away. And at that point, we realized we'd have to fly. Even then, we hadn't realized how far it was, because the plane took off and stopped in Houston. And we couldn't understand why everybody was relaxing, going to sleep, and taking their coats off, because we thought it was going to be a little hot. So I met him, and it was quite a nice story about that. Lucas's office, when they were preparing Raiders, was on the edge of what's now the big Universal Studios block, and in a little brick building. I think it's still there. It was last time I was there. At that time, it was called the Egg Marketing Board, and he left the Egg Marketing Board sign over there. That was Lucas's office. And when I walked in, he and Spielberg were on the floor in the office, playing what was really new technology at the time, which were those little round cassette players with their own speakers on the side. I'd never seen anything like it, and it was new to them too. And we all got down on the floor and listened to the sound quality, and we all go, wow, this sound quality is fantastic. Which in those days it was, 30 years ago now. What am I talking about? How I got the part. And they just said in the middle of it, here's the script, go away and see if you like it. So I went to the next room. And I got about halfway through the script when the monkey threw the first coin. But he throws a grape in the end, it's been poisoned. Eat that date. It's been poisoned and dies, so something's up. And that's what it was. So I thought it was really funny. I thought it was great. And they said, okay, well, we'll let you know this week. So we went off for a drive around Arizona, which we'd never seen before. About halfway through the week, in Globe, Arizona, I think it was. I got a phone call from them saying you got the part. And that was it. The sequel to that is that we then went back to England and carried on with that life. This must have been springtime, April or May. And about June or July, when they were going to start filming, we were on holiday in England. I don't know if you know, it has a lot of small canals crisscrossing, which were terrific holiday experience. You hire a little boat and go up these canals. It's beautiful. You're wrong with these. There was a sign on the side of the lock. You have to go and open the locks yourself and get the water up and down. And it said, Paul Damon, please phone your agent. Well, I knew Paul Damon, who was another English actor, long dead now. And I knew he wasn't on the canals. There were a few of us who did the canals, and I knew he wasn't one of them. So I thought, that might be me. So I went and phoned my agent, and I said, do you want to talk to me? He said, yes, you've got to come down to L Street, where Steven's got his office now, ready to start production. Because there's some questions he wants to ask you. I thought, well, it's really weird, because I'd already got the job, so I thought, oh, I'm going to lose this job. It didn't much matter, I just met my girlfriend, I wasn't too worried about it, I went to meet him, went in the office, and he said, I forgot to ask you if you can do a French accent. I said, yeah, I can do a French accent. He said, well, can you do it? I said, well, we've got something like this. I thought, he said, fine, good. I was sure. I went back to the canal and we continued our holiday until the beginning of shooting.
Anybody with any questions? Anybody? Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
We're all friends here.
We're all friends. Well,
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about working with Lucas and just what it was like. What it's like.
Well, we got on very, very well. He had this thing, as I was saying, that he didn't much respect actors and their work. He thinks he's acting, and you could see that from his later career. Later on, he was always much more interested in the merchandising than in the movies. But he was perfectly charming and friendly, and he shot a lot of the second unit stuff himself, which is why he was able to shoot the Germans over there. He was shooting. Later on, after we finished the film, I went to visit them when he was doing a Star Wars on the set in Elm Street, and he'd adopted a baby at that time. And by then, my wife and I had a baby. And so we both walked around the set with these crying babies during the shooting. And because he was George Lucas, nobody turned around and told him to shut his baby up. Why? And so that because I was with him, they didn't tell me either. So it was a very strange experience. So on one level, it was very easy and friendly, and on the other level, didn't have any respect for actually what we were doing much at all. As opposed to Spielberg, who was very content because he cast whoever it was in the role to let me get on with it. Like the scene drinking the wine with Karen Allen in the tent. He knew we were both theatre actors, used to rehearsing, and he wasn't happy with the script for that scene. So he sent us away, so we'll shoot this tomorrow, go away and improvise it, and make up a better scene for yourselves. Which we did, and he more or less shot it in its entirety is more or less what we made up on the spot.
Do the actors do they appreciate the fact that he didn't respect them? Did they see the why, or were they just upset?
No, we weren't upset by it. As I said, when we saw the Germans working, we knew that they weren't good actors anyway, and were very unlikely to appear in the movie. It was just something that we sort of accepted from him, that was his attitude. He wasn't rude with it. He wasn't disrespectful in the sense of being rude, but disrespectful in the sense that anybody could do it. A lot of people think that. Yeah. Hello, come and sit down. You haven't missed anything. A few jokes.
When you got the part in Indiana Jones, did you realize how big the movie was going to be?
No, I don't think anybody knew that at the time, because if you remember, the film of Spielberg's immediately before it was 1941, which had been a flop, and probably, I think, the only flop he's ever had, wasn't it? I think. Yeah, I think it's still a remarkable movie with remarkable things in it, but as a whole, it was badly received and didn't get big box office. So there was a feeling going into Raiders about, has Spielberg lost the plot? Has he lost his twinkle, as they say? You know? And he'd agreed to do Raiders with George Lucas. They were old friends, as you all know. But he'd agreed to do Raiders for much less than his normal fee, and for in a much quicker time than he'd ever done a movie before. And in fact, he said that was a really good learning curve for him, and it speeded up his whole thinking and planning process for the rest of his movie career.
So what inspired you to get into acting?
Well, who knows? Those things lie hidden deep. I don't like to examine it too much, in case it stops me doing it. But the answer to your question really is that I'd always done it, from kindergarten, Sunday school, right through school. When I left school, I didn't have there was nobody in my family who knew about acting. We didn't go to the theatre as a family, except most families in Britain go to pantomime at Christmas. Are you familiar with pantomime? It's a very strange thing we have where men dress up as women, and the women dress up as men, and they're all sort of old folk tales that are dressed up. Nowadays, the tradition has been, corrupted a bit, because they always get TV stars who come doing it, just to attract the public. You can find a really good old pantomime, if you're in Britain at all at Christmas time, go and see it. Why am I talking about this pantomime? What was your question?
What inspired you to get into acting?
Oh, right. So I did that sort of thing. I was in the Boy Scouts and acted in the Boy Scouts. Left school and I went into advertising. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was a teacher's training college. It seemed I didn't like advertising because I had to wear a suit all the time. And I thought, well, I'll give it up and become a teacher. What am I going to teach? Her life seemed pretty easy. I thought I'll become a drama teacher because I was interested in drama. At the time I was in advertising, I was still going to an amateur dramatic company in London at the time, a respected company, doing good work. And then when I went to the drama school, in the same class as me was Helen Mirren and a few other people. My first one was an actress in Hammer horror films for a while, called Judy Matheson. And they knew about acting. So it suddenly occurred to me, hey, I could do this. I'm working with them every day in school. So I got my teaching diploma, but instead of teaching, I went off to the theatre and worked in the theatre in Britain for quite a few years, about 5 years before I started doing TV and then started getting film work. And from there it sort of took off.
Do you have a preference, or do you have a preference of theater versus TV or movies?
I've always done theatre. I've always gone back and done theatre because it's an actor's medium. You're in control of the theatre in a way you're never in control of movies. TV is a different ball game entirely because it's all about speed and doing things quickly, and I don't much enjoy it. Although I'm in the middle of doing a TV series now called Da Vinci's Demons. Do you know that? Have you ever seen it? I've joined for the third series, which should be coming up this year. In fact, I've got to go back and reshoot some this week. Not because I've done anything wrong, it's because they changed the script. So now I'm hoping that's going to continue and I'll be in that for a bit. I'm not as keen on working all the time as I was. Obviously, that's why I'm here.
Let's talk about your first theater role.
The first theatre, there was in those days in Britain, a theatre called Weekly for Repertory. And you would learn a play during the week, put it on, you'd start on the Monday learning a play. By the end of that week, you'd get to the next following Monday, you'd put that play on and start learning the next play and rehearsing it. So you'd have a week to do a play. And sometimes we did big plays. If we did a Shakespeare, we might have 2 weeks to do it. If we do a whole Shakespeare play, which you'd learn put on in 2 weeks. So you're learning one play, rehearsing it, and then playing in the evening in another one. And that was a great experience, a great learning curve. The problem with it is you start to pick up after, and I stopped doing it after about 7 months, but you start to pick up quite bad habits about the quickest, easiest way to do something. And sometimes you have to just to survive. For instance, in those days, and I'm talking the mid-60s here, there were still old-fashioned plays around, thrillers, detective stories, Agatha Christie's, things like that. Well, they're impossible to learn because they're so badly written. And a lot of them, and I was always playing the detective inspector. So it was always like, where were you on the night of July the 22nd? So I got quickly in the habit of writing all my lines down on the notebook. Pretend I was writing, I was actually reading my next line. Because this went badly wrong on some occasions when I turned over 2 pages, and the poor bit didn't matter to me, I was still reading it, but the poor person who I was meant to be interviewing didn't know where they were. I was asking them somebody else's questions, and they couldn't turn around and say, it wasn't me on July the 22nd, I wasn't there. It was one of those sorts of theatres where a lot of things went wrong because it was rushed, but you learned a lot very quickly.
And so, this reminds me actually about your audition process. How did Ivan Ooze, how did you get the role of Ivan Ooze?
Well, that was an audition. One of the earliest, nowadays we audition all the time on tape. But that, in those days, you often met with the directors. But because they were already out in Australia setting up the film, I had to do this on tape then. And this was, I'm not quite sure of the date, but we were filmed 20 years ago, so it must have been 21 years ago. And I got this crazy script for this character. And the character originally really did change shape. He was a shapeshifter. And that's how the ooze came about. All the scenes ended with him turning into slime, and going under a door, and coming out as a completely separate character on the other side of the door, which was very interesting, and gave me the idea, although the script itself didn't change very much, this idea of him changing into other people all the time had gone by the time I got the job into Australia. But it did give me the idea that I could be as free as I liked, which is why I changed my voice as much as I could during the film. From one scene to the other, you know, I did a lot of it imitating W.C. Fields, and I did other imitations of other voices during it, simply because I was having fun with the whole thing. And that was the process of getting that role. Anyone else?
Shy.
Yeah.
To tag the aspect on auditions, because I've dabbled in acting myself in that part. But so then you must have a worst audition story.
Good one.
I don't know about that. I mean, there'll be many jobs I didn't get through doing auditions, but that's something you live with, you know. I don't think there was one that particularly sticks in my mind. I'm a bit embarrassed now when I look back to my very first auditions for the theatre, because at the time as a young actor, my great hero was Marlon Brando. And I used to, one of my audition pieces was to go on and do a speech at Brando's from Streetcar, which was just, looking back, a plain imitation of Marlon Brando. I was, 22 years old, you know, it was ridiculous. Not at all like Marlon Brando, but so I'm embarrassed looking back at it now, but at the time I did it. Didn't get the jobs, but I did it. You know. Yeah. No, they didn't know what. No, George directed that scene. He didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know what language the natives were going to speak. Didn't know what, and he just said, "Make it up. Say anything." So my mind went completely blank, and he said, well, say, I'll have a double BLT. So when there's a line when I turn around and give them an order in Auditions, as it turned out to be, which is the name of a brown bread in England. And he said, so what I actually said to them was, I'll have a double BLT. And then we dubbed it afterwards when he decided what the line would be. Incidentally, Harrison had started that film nearly having a plane crash, didn't he? Do you remember? When he takes off, and the snakes in the plane, and the plane clips a tree, I think, doesn't it? It's nearly happened to him again. I should have told him at the time, be careful, 30 years down the line. Oh, that was really easy. He's very delightful. He doesn't like, unlike Karen and I, though, he was not a theatre actor, he didn't like rehearsing anything. I think that's one of the reasons why Steven sent us away to rehearse, because he knew Harrison wouldn't want to rehearse anything. One of his great strengths is his improvisation. Some of the best lines in Rene's Harrison improvised on the spot. There's one about the Germans are getting away, they've got the Ark and they're rushing away in the trucks. It's beginning that long sequence, that long chase sequence with the trucks and the Germans are jumping on and he gets them. And he has a line where he says, I think Karen turns to him and says, what do we do now? And he said, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go along. Well, that's what he said on the day. The other famous one is when he fights the great guy dressed in black with the scimitar, and he just pulls his gun and shoots him, which is obviously the logical thing to do. But the day before, they'd rehearsed a long fight sequence. But Harrison got very ill that night, as almost everybody did on that shoot. I think only Spielberg and one of the producers, Howard Kazanjian, who didn't get really sick with dysentery in Tunisia at that time. Not because of the Tunisian food, it was because of the food our English chefs were flying in and buying locally, and we were eating salads, which is something you should never do there. You can't trust the water. Anyway, so Harrison turned up to shoot this fight sequence, which he'd rehearsed the day before, and he was crippled, he couldn't do it, he couldn't move. So he said, why don't I just shoot him? And that was it. The other great line he made up was at the end, right at the end, when on the ship before they go to the island, when Karen's dabbing his wounds and everything. I don't know what her line is, but his line was, it's not the years, it's the mileage. He made that up on the spot too, which is very nice. Anything else? Welcome. Do chip in. You don't know where we are in the story, so. Okay. You got a question though? Okay. Yeah.
In all your work, I enjoy a lot of British work, comedy, drama. How does the BBC control so much entertainment?
How does it control so much, did you say?
Yeah. How does the BBC have so much control over entertainment in the United Kingdom? We're like a major, we're like BBC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it's
They don't produce very much anymore, but you're quite right, they used to be major producers of drama and comedy and stuff.
So they syndicate, they buy now,
now
like
they
the
tend to
cable
buy
network.
more. Yeah, it's true. They do one or two good things, but actually their reputation for really cutting edge stuff is not what it was. It's partly because they're more interested in corporate, in my opinion, more interested in corporate power now and keeping the profits turning than in producing original material, which they used to do. I know our system's quite different. We have, the BBC is supported by a tax. So the government gives them a percentage of money every year to keep going. Now, of course, that becomes very susceptible to political interference. For instance, if the right-wing government in there, always accusing the BBC of being left-wing. If there's a left-wing government in, they're always accusing the BBC of being right-wing. There's no way they can win, really, And part of their stance as perhaps one of the major news programs in the world is to try and be as neutral as they can be. For my money, they're never neutral enough.
Well, compared to what we have here in the States, they're
Well,
well balanced.
compared to most countries on the
I
earth.
do listen to their news every morning going to work myself.
And it's not bad. And certainly there is a section called BBC World News. Do you listen to that?
Yes,
Which
sir.
is very good. And I think that is pretty objective.
So, in the British Isles, do most actors choose one or the other as their medium of choice?
No, it doesn't work like that. And I don't think it works like that for any actors, but most actors are happy. They're not happy to accept anything they're offered, but we're happy to work, you know, whoever the employer is. It'd be a very remarkable actor who's able to say, I only work for the BBC, or I only work for an independent company. I don't think that would ever happen. They may have loyalties to one or the other, rather than, you know, if they've done a big series for the BBC, then they've probably got loyalties to the BBC, but it wouldn't stop them from working for another company.
Got another
Yes.
question over here.
Speaking of improvisations earlier, was there a lot of that, aside from the accents that you did as avenues, was there any of that for the Power Rangers movie?
Hardly at all. It's funny because one of the things that happened here, Power Rangers isn't big in Europe, and it's only, I do a few of these Comic Cons in Europe over the years, and it's only in the last 3 years that people have started asking for avenues pictures. So people here in the last 2 or 3 days have been reminding me about the film in a way I'd completely forgotten. And you are all much more familiar with it than I am. You remember, I just had to retape some of the lines for somebody this morning, and they had to go and find a copy of the film to tell me what it was, because I'd forgotten. So the actual answer to your question is none of it was improvised at all. It was all the original script. And very funny, I think. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do the part, because they gave me great freedom. Although I didn't improvise what I actually said, I had great freedom to improvise how I said it. They didn't know what to do with the part, really, is the answer. And they were waiting for an actor to turn up and show them how it should be done.
I did a great job.
Well, thank you. I was happy to do it. Yeah.
Is there any role in theater that you haven't had yet that you'd like to have in the future?
I've always wanted to play the fox in Pinocchio. Who's an actor, isn't he? It's dead, by the way, if you remember. In the movie, in the cartoon, he sings Hey Fiddly-Dee. An actor's life for me. Apart from that, no. Yeah.
You mentioned people getting sick in Tunisia. Were there
Yeah.
any other issues filming in the desert?
Let's see. That was an issue. I mean, that was a major issue. And I thought I'd got away with it. I didn't get sick until the very last day. As in most films, we start at the back and then work forwards. You know, the first bit of filming was in the submarine pen in France. But to answer your question, on the last day in Tunisia, when we were then going to fly to Hawaii to do the opening sequence with the mountain, Hovitos, I got sick that day. And I mean, you get really sick then. You're just holding yourself, you know, you daren't move. And by that time in the shoot, the crew, the film crew, the same film crew I'd worked with in Belize on Dogs of War immediately before. Now, Belize is hot, and we worked very hard there, but they hadn't worked ever so hard as Spielberg made them work. He was running between setups. They got completely exhausted. I would see them at lunchtime collapse into their food. Really, I'm not making that up. So there was a point when most of the people, including Harrison, had stopped talking to Steven. They were all sort of just gripping themselves to get through it and hoping this man would get ill so he'd slow down a bit. And on the last day, we're driving away from the set. We finished filming, we had to get on the plane the next day and go to Hawaii. And I had these terrible stomach cramps. And Steven came and sat next to me in the wagon leaving the set in the desert. And I had to go the whole way back. And he was trying to have a conversation. And I just go, oh, please go away. I can't. No. And I didn't tell him what was going on. I just thought I was very odd. He probably knew, whereas everybody had gone through it. Except him, who had all his food flown in cans from the smartest shop in London, for the basins. and one of the producers, Howard Kazanjian. And the rumor about Howard was that he didn't get sick because he wore sellotape over his mouth when he was in the shower. Who knew? Perhaps it wasn't true. Who was in the shower with him, we want to know.
So what other difficulties that you've had over the years, not just Raiders or Power Rangers, but any other work that you've done?
There's quite a funny story I should tell you about Power Rangers, which was a difficulty. It was these great big boots I was wearing. And in order to move around, I would have to take the boots off, gather the costume under my arms, so just so I could move from one side of the set to the other with a bit of freedom. In this, one of the sets, they had made the steps, I didn't find this out until afterwards, of polystyrene. So I was I was wearing trainers, and I was a bit wobbly on my feet anyway, because I was used to these big tightness and big boots. The step broke, and I went down and twisted my ankle very badly. It's very heavy wearing all this stuff. And in case it was serious, I said, I've got to go to the hospital and check this out. But of course, I had all the purple on. There was no way I was going to take it all off for an hour and a half, and perhaps come back and work in the afternoon when they'd have to put it on again for another 4 hours. So I got out of the costume, I had a t-shirt, jeans on, shorts underneath, it was summer, and they took me to a local hospital in Sydney. So, you know how it is when you're in hospital and there's somebody who's done something awful, and you pass them in a corridor and you go, oh, I want to look at that. What? You know, somebody's got a rifle up their nose or something. What has gone on? Well, that was the reaction I got. They wheeled me out of this car and into there were all small clinics along a sort of around the suburban road, a shopping centre actually. So a lot of people passing me. There's this man with this purple head with things sticking up all over him. But the rest of them dressed perfectly well, being wheeled into the hospital. It then turned out they took a look at me and looked at them, and they said, you'll have to go to an x-ray. To get to an x-ray, you have to go to another clinic further up the street. So they pushed me through this line of shoppers with this stuff all over my head. And everybody I passed would go, oh, God. That was a little difficulty for a while. The other difficulty about it was that I couldn't then go back to work either, so I had to spend a lot of time with my leg in the air, resting, and I had a very nice apartment above a fish restaurant, and they used to send the food up. Good. Some good effects from it. Anything else?
Anybody else with a question?
What was the most fun you had filming?
Most fun. I think almost the most fun I had was virtually the first film I did, The Dogs of War that I was telling you about. Unusually, all the cast got on terribly well. I met my wife in it. Belize was delightful. And it was one of the nicest experiences I've had. I've been very fortunate. I've hardly had any bad experiences. It's all been pretty nice, really. Yeah. I can't think of any. I did do a short film playing Picasso 3 years ago, and that was terrific. It was really tremendous to be able to do that. Unfortunately, it hasn't been seen anywhere because short films are very difficult to place. They just get shown at a few festivals, you know. Yeah.
So what advice would you give for an upcoming actor?
Don't. No. No. If you've got to do it, you've got to do it. Just go and work at it as hard as you can, and you have to take risks. I would say one thing, it's a life of risk, and the risk is in the work, so you've got to enjoy risk in your work. But the difficulty of the life, the difficulty of the work, rather, is the life, living the life, because you don't work all the time, that's extremely fortunate. You don't have much control of your life, therefore. So you've got to be in a position where you can accept being rejected and not be depressed by that. You've got to keep on keeping on. Water on stone. And is that patrol off? Anything else?
So I guess another question would be that if you had the opportunity to alter any storylines or any scenes of the movies or TV shows that you've done in the past, what would you change?
I tell you what I changed straight away is the stuff I have to go and shoot next Wednesday or Thursday. Because I play this character in Da Vinci's Demons. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Have you seen it at all? You have seen it. Well, it's all loosely based on the life of Leonardo da Vinci in the Renaissance. And I play a character who's now called Savonarola, who was a real character, who incidentally died at age 48. So I'm not perfect. So, which was also a level of the film. The program's a fantasy of his characters, it's not history. But Savonarola is a sort of philosopher, a religious philosopher. So I have enormous speeches of great difficulty to learn. And now they've decided, because I started off playing another character, I was cast to play a character called Asterion, entirely made up character, and then the second character said to me, we think it'd be a very good idea if you play Savonarola instead. We'll just change his name. Well, now they've looked at the thing cut together, it doesn't make much sense. So I've got to go and redo parts of these scenes with a different enormous speeches, all of which I have got about 6 pages of speeches to learn by Wednesday or Thursday. It's Wednesday next week. I'm just thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. No, I have learned it's quite a good idea to have idiot boards in those circumstances. And because it's up to them, they've changed their minds about the script. It's not my responsibility. Just have to wear contact lenses and have the script placed here. I learned that from Raymond Burr. You remember Raymond Burr and Perry Mason? I worked with him in Paris a few years ago, and I was playing a German in this thing. And he said, well, that reminds me of some fun stories. Anyway, he said, I couldn't learn this German, I don't speak German. And finally he said, pin it on my chest. Raymond Burr was about 7 foot tall and 7 foot wide, so it didn't matter, the cameras were behind him anyway. So he just pinned my sheets on his chest and just read the thing. Perfectly well. There was a story about an actor called Anthony Franciosa. Do you remember? He used to be married to Shelley Winters. Only the older members of the audience remember this. He was filming out in a public airport somewhere, and he always used idiot boards. And Raymond Burr, by the way, always used idiot boards, as they're called. He had electronic ones on each side of them, of whoever he was talking to. And there would be somebody who would alter the script, so he never learned anything. Anyway, somebody in the public went up to Anthony Franciosa and said, why don't you bother to learn this stuff? And he said, can you imagine what would happen if this stuff stuck in your head?
So we have about 5 more minutes. So I don't want to say this is your last chance, because Mr. Freeman will be on the floor as well. But any other questions, comments, prayers? I don't know if anything.
I was reminded of one story you might enjoy. When I was, I had to stay. I was in a series called Falcon Crest every year for some years, and became a tax exile briefly because I was well paid. Those were the days. And so, because we couldn't go back to the UK, my wife and I and our daughter, we went to the West Indies where we had some relatives. And I got a call from, what's his name? I can't remember. A producer who I'd met in LA before, because we were doing Falcon Crest in LA. And the producer said, I want you to come and play this part of this German. And I said, I'm not playing any more Germans. Well, there was a time after Raiders when I was only offered Germans. So I played a number of commandants of concentration camps, for instance. And after that, I thought, I don't want to do this. What am I in this for? I'm going to end up playing Hitler. It's not something I'm aiming towards in life. So I said, I'm not interested. He said, well, I'll send you the script anyway. And then I heard from my agent that this was a low-budget movie. So next time he rang up, he said, have you got the script? I said, yeah, but you're not paying sufficient money anyway. It's not going to happen. He said, well, look, just read the script and see. And he put the phone down there. Next minute, my agent rang up and said, they've increased the money. So, okay, well, I'm not interested. I haven't got the script. Next day, Howard, what was it? rang up and said, "Have you got the script?" I said, "No, it hasn't arrived." I said, "Okay." I put the phone down. My agent went up. They put the money up. This went on all week. By the Friday, I said, "I don't care what the script is, I'll do it." But they've got to fly me from here. I can't go back to Britain. And they were shooting in Paris. They've got to fly me from here, from St. Vincent, which means going to Martinique by a small plane, go from Martinique to Paris, and then we can't go back to Britain. We've got to go and see friends in Boston. They've got to get me there. He said, "Fine, fine, fine." So all this thing about it being a small budget movie went out of the window, because I hadn't even seen the script for this part. It turned out to be a good German, by the way. And then I found out that the script had been in the hotel all along, under a different name. One of those lucky accidents. Doesn't happen very often.
So did it help the characterization in Raiders for you and the Nazi Party that it's such a rough and tumble film set, and Harrison, accident prone as he may be, or he's rumored to be, doing his own stunts and whatnot, you don't have that many stunts. You're just hanging out, chilling in the desert. So that
I've always been the sort of villain who orders other people around. I don't do the dirty work.
So does that get the resentment from the other side, the good guys, or they were just like,
No, Harrison doesn't do all his own stunts, but he used to do a lot of them, and he does what he wants to do. You know, I don't think he takes undue risks. It probably takes more when he's playing now, actually. Apart from things like, being amongst the snakes. The only dangerous snake was that cobra. There's a nice story about that. Well, I'll finish up with a nice story about snakes. Anyone who doesn't like snakes can leave the room. When we first got to shoot that scene with the snakes, it was in the studio in Elstree, just outside London. And they built enormous studios where they did the Bond films, the early Bond films. And they made a hole in the ceiling, and we were up in this hole in the ceiling, looking down at Harrison on the floor with Karen, all those statues around. And they laid wires across the whole floor with plastic snakes on it. So they could pull the wires and all of his own moving. Stephen took one look at this and decided it wasn't good enough. He didn't like the look of it. So he ordered a few hundred more snakes, garter snakes, so harmless, from a snake farm in Holland. So we didn't film it that day. We waited a few days until his snakes turned up. Then he put them on top of the rubber and plastic snakes on the floor. And that worked terribly well. Except they then found out when it came to the thing of torches, that actually snakes aren't afraid of torches. They rather like the heat and they tend to come towards them. In between, because he didn't want the snakes to be the same, he got a few pythons, the big snakes, which were not poisonous but could bite. And one cobra, which was the dangerous one. That was in a glass sort of fish tank. If you look at that scene carefully, there's a moment when it lifts up its head, and Harrison's looking right at it on the other side. And the thing is up, ready to pounce, as cobras do. Well, it got like that because one of the python took a dislike to the assistant director, who was a man called David Tomlin, a very nice man. No reason why the snake should have disliked him, but it kept taking bites at him as he walked by during the day. So in the end, he got so mad with the snake, he picked it up and he dropped it in the case with the cobra. The python went to bite the cobra went up, bang, killed the python dead immediately, and lost one of its fangs in the python's back. And was then in such pain and such anger, it stood up like that for the rest of the afternoon, allowing him to finish the scene. So, it turned out well.
Thank you so much. Please give a round of applause. And of course, he's at his new theatrical.
I'll build it, go back there straight away.
So,
thank you all very much. It was a bit gossipy, wasn't it? I hope you were serious.